keeping an eye on what your enemies are doing is never a really a bad thing. In fact, it's often a very good thing because you get to see a different point of view. You get to see what they're saying about current situations. You get to see what their messaging is, and then you can sort of plan to fight back against that messaging. And I've always said this, I don't just read sort of, left wing stuff. I try to get as varied a media diet as I possibly can because I always find it interesting to see takes from people, even if I disagree with them. Because again, I find it very interesting just to see what they're saying about current politics, what they're saying about what we're advocating or what they're trying to advocate for. This is how sort of you should be looking at. Don't be afraid to to watch a video from someone who's right wing. Yeah, you might disagree with them completely, but then you get to see a different side of the argument, and it is very valuable to you. And certainly, because I've said before, I've got a lot of debate experience. This is what you need to do to be able to advance your position and eventually defeat your enemy. And I came across this today in the Telegraph, and to be honest, the fact that this is in the Telegraph, this really represents, I think, serious worryings of high-level Tories who think that after this next general election, not only is the Tory party not going to exist, but there will emerge a new challenger to their party. And it will be some sort of nationalist populist party that will be able to challenge them on a lot of things, and they will lose out to that party. And we've already heard the rumors of a Boris Farage-led party. I don't think that's going to happen because Boris Johnson does not like Nigel Farage. I cannot see those two ever working together. But if that vehicle ever did exist, I wouldn't think it would have legs, shall we say. Reform, they claim that they're going to challenge all of the seats for the next general election, but they didn't have a big win at this upcoming local election, which a lot of people, and even including myself, speculated that they had done because, as I said, Richard Trice and Farage had maybe seen polling beforehand to say that they were going to do potentially quite well at the local elections. But we'll see what happens. But Reform becoming this party, picking up that flag, highly doubt it. It is highly likely if there was to be a party that would come in to sort of really challenge the Conservatives on the right side of things, then it would be ultimately, I think, a brand new party. Would it be led by Farage? Would someone new emerge? We don't know. But interestingly enough, today this comes in, and it is a time that even they can see. Yeah, our current leader is an absolute disaster. The party is completely out of ideas. It doesn't know what to do. It's fighting amongst itself constantly, and it can't govern. So what are we to do? Well, if you're really in a panic, rather than try and solve those problems, and have answers to those questions, you instead worry about external threats. And that is what we are seeing today. A worry of a potential external threat towards the party. So let's see what they've got to say about this. Like I say, this comes from the Telegraph. But before we do get into that today, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee. And of course, there is the YouTube thank you button. And of course, there's the Pony Club as well. So let's crack on into this. So the title is Rishi Sunak's catastrophic plan has opened the way for a new populist party. This has been Rishi Sunak's mensis horribilis, the month when the Tory House of Cards finally came crashing down. The disasters meld into one, as they do when a regime is imploding. All the sleaze, Boris Johnson's expulsions, that very dreadful Partygate video at Tory HQ, and now, of course, the calamitous economic news and the mortgage interest time bomb. And he is right. I made a video about this just a couple of days ago about that mortgage crisis that we're potentially heading into. And the thing is, if that happens, that will kickstart a whole load of other different problems that the mortgages are linked to. It could it could certainly burst the whole housing bubble. It could start a rent crisis. You could see landlords selling their properties at huge rates because they borrow a lot of these landlords to essentially get those properties in the first place and then use the rent to pay off the mortgage. It is going to be a huge disaster to walk into. And I said before, I really hope it doesn't happen. But to be honest, we've got a Tory party at the moment that doesn't seem to have a solution to potential problems it knows are about to happen. And that is incredibly worrying. Incredibly worrying. So, Sunak's gambit to portray himself as a competent, considered, cautious, spreadsheet-wielding technocrat who would, under pressure, who would eventually underpromise and overdeliver, has failed spectacularly. That's because that was not what Sunak was promising. Sunak instead really promised everything, but has done nothing. Sunak is a do-nothing prime minister. There's a ton of stuff he could be doing, but he's doing nothing. And he's doing nothing because the party is so split. Because if he did try to do anything, the party would start infighting itself over that particular proposal. And that would only lead to even worse outcomes in the Tory party. So he's desperately trying to, I think, just limp on until the end. And even though it's going to end up as a complete zombie parliament, which is going to be really bad because, like I say, we've got all these problems coming down the pipe and a government that just cannot do anything because if it did, it just starts fighting itself. That is not how you should be governing. And if Rishi Sunak had a spine, he'd be able to sort them out and be able to tell them to stop fighting. But he doesn't. Because of that, he's a weak prime minister. So back to it. So the details of his 5 pledges don't even matter. It is impossible to shake off the general stench of failure that emanates from his government. And that is true. Being seen as a failure in politics never ends well. Just ask Priti Patel, who constantly said she was going to solve the migrant crisis. She was going to solve it. She was going to solve it. She was the one to do it. Ultimately, she became seen as a failure and was, well, banished back to the backbenchers, hopefully, as we can hope, never to return. But in a place, Suella Braverman came back, and even though she has said she will help to solve the migrant crisis, she hasn't made any cast iron pledges that would be made, shall we say, to see her as a failure. Now, she is an absolute failure as someone in charge of the Home Office, but she's so far managing to avoid the perception of failure, which sometimes in politics can be far more important. So, starting when he was Chancellor, Sunak was understandably terrified at how high interest rates would torpedo the public finances, and he rightly fought to try and keep public spending in check. And he, quote, brilliantly sought to keep Britain open in the later stages of COVID, but also foolishly turned a blind eye to the Bank of England's incompetence and wrongly rammed through high tax increases in the hope that cutting the deficit would hopefully pacify the bonds market and also contain inflation. And again, bear in mind, you are seeing them challenge more and more. The Conservatives really challenge the Bank of England's mechanisms that it's got. No, it's only got interest rates. That's essentially really it. And I wonder if eventually the Conservatives, or maybe it's this new party that might emerge, might actually try and say, look, the Bank of England should no longer be independent. Now, there are a great many reasons why you want the bank to be independent because, like I say, a party could come in, be doing really badly in the polls, and then artificially lower interest rates, basically to give people a better time before an upcoming general election, even though that's bad economically. So I think preserving the bank's independence is probably something quite important that we should look at, but also how we can make it better function. And no one's really saying that. How can we make the Bank of England a better functioning part of not only the UK's economy, but its democracy as well? Do we have a situation where, just like maybe not like we elect a speaker, as someone who's an MP, but is there maybe a way that we elect someone maybe to run the economy? I don't know. I don't think that's really would work in the best interest. I think that's an absolutely terrible idea. Actually, again, that came off the top of my head. So if that's an awful idea, I completely agree with you. That just came off the top of my head. But I think there's a ton of stuff we could probably do to really help the Bank of England. But we'll see. We'll see. I think that's a far bigger question. And to be honest, it's its own video topic in itself. But never mind. Maybe another time. So of course, it didn't work. The money printing and the supply side destruction unleashed during COVID and the Governor Andrew Bailey's subsequent dithering ruined everything. Inflation remains stuck at 8.7%, fueling a pay rise doom loop, and the core inflation is rising. 2-year fixed rates mortgage rates are now at 6.15%, and the national debt has smashed the 100% level of GDP for the first time since 1961, and growth currently is barely detectable. This could be soon crunched as the Bank of England panics into ever steeper rate hikes. And of course, one thing we should say, part of this, why this is happening, is Brexit. But of course, he's not really going to mention that. But just going to get it in there. The tax burden is, of course, to reach its post-war high. And with interest costs on the national debt rocketing, Jeremy Hunt's hopes to try and cut the basic rate of tax next year could be soon vetoed by the Office of Budget Responsibility. And with general election likely in the autumn of 2024, how can the Tories be anything other than toast? We are at best stuck in stagflation and at worst face a recession to strip out the inflation of our economy. This is the bitter blow for Sunak. He was always wrong to believe that rates could be kept low. That is true. But then again, what did Rishi Sunak really do to try and either lower interest rates or to keep them low? He did nothing. You know, this is what I will always keep trying to emphasize. Everyone, all the Tories will try and defend and say Rishi Sunak has been good on the economy, but compared to what? He's done nothing. And even though Liz Truss crashed the economy, which again was bad, at least she did something. Even though it was an absolutely awful decision, at least she did something. Rishi Sunak has so far just refused to do nothing. And we know we've got problems coming down the pipe. And Rishi Sunak still is doing nothing about them. Why? Because his party is so split, so divided that if he even wanted to put something forward, there's no chance that the Trump Tory party would even potentially even agree. Potentially, maybe having to try and rely on Labour to pass something, which again you do not want to be seen politically. That would be an incredibly bad move, especially for a party that has a majority. But anyway, let's get back to it. So last July, Jesus Christ, the economist Patrick Minford argued again. You should never ever quote Patrick Minford because Patrick Minford is a absolutely awful economist. He is one of the worst economists out there. And everyone makes fun of him because of he's such a bad economist. He's not really considered to be good. He's only really considered to be good by, of course, these free market fundamentalists, of which, again, the Tory graph very much does support. But anyway, back to it. So the economist Patrick Minford argued that the interest rates would need to normalize to combat inflation, to try and ensure that the savings were properly rewarded, and to try and weed out productivity sapping zombie companies. As again, we've mentioned this before. This is what these free market economists always say. Oh, there's all these zombie companies out there. They're really bad because, again, they haven't grown. But they're still doing pretty good, but they just haven't grown. They're still making a profit. They just haven't grown. Oh, no, that's a zombie company. It needs to die. But there you go. That's free market fundamentalist for you. So interest rates were at the time ludicrously low, of 1.25%, and inflation was surging. And Minford argued, again, the idea that you would use the word reasonably, that Minford argued reasonably, is completely ridiculous. That a normal level of interest rates is more like 5 to 7%, and I don't think it would be a bad thing if we go back to that level. Well, here we are at the moment. But of course, remember, this is Patrick Minford we're talking about, the complete economic clown. He said, and I have to put this in air quotes, rightly, that supply side tax cuts and deregulation combined with higher interest rates was the correct medicine to pull Britain out of this doldrum. That is what essentially Liz Truss tried to do. And she crashed the economy, almost destroying the pensions market as well. I think she's convincingly proved Patrick Minford 100% wrong, even though she's still out there saying, "No, I was completely right." No, no, we do not want a repeat of Trussonomics. Thank you very much. So the left and the economic establishment went crazy, focusing exclusively on the pain this would cause to those with mortgages, and Sunak joined in. Again, the idea that this guy can't even understand that it wasn't just people with mortgages who would be feeling the pain, but it would be a load of people across society who would be feeling pain as well. And he can't even seem to admit that. And of course, if you got this, what happens, as we said, this causes a mortgage crisis. What if you get people who then can't pay the rent? Landlords have to start selling their houses. This leads to a rent crisis and potentially a housing crisis as well. Is that going to be good for the economy? Because that could easily cause a recession. So, in an unfortunate tweet, he said, "We have to grip inflation, not exacerbate it." Liz Truss's economic guru, Patrick Minford, said that their plan means, yes, interest rates have to go up, and that is a good thing. Really, calculate what that could cost you and your family. Yeah. And we've said it before. Economically, there is a ton of different things this government could do, but it doesn't want to do them because it is massively economic interventionist. It doesn't want to get involved in the economy because Rishi Sunak and the predominant Tory credo is the government should not be involved in any regulatory using any regulatory means to sort of regulate the economy. As a result, that's partly where we are. We've got a party who knows it could be doing stuff, but just refuses to do it out of an ideological standpoint. So, needless to say, supporters of monetary normalization weren't heartless. Really, it sure seems like you were. They just realized that the era of free money couldn't continue. Again, this is another free market fundamentalist talking point. This whole idea of, again, feeds into the whole zombie company thing, that these zombie companies were getting out all these loans. They were essentially having free money and they weren't growing, and they were a zombie company, and essentially you were just feeding a zombie with all this free money. And that was bad for the economy because then these companies weren't failing so that new companies could rise and take their place. Of course, economically, once again, that's never been proven that a company would, quote, rise again to take its place. And of course, it highlighted that the young had actually lost out on the most from the bubble in house prices, fueled in part by the low rates and quantitative easing. We now have the worst of all worlds, and a year on, inflation has been exacerbated. Rates are now nearly the level that Minford had predicted. Families are calculating the cost, and there they are. Still isn't any pathway for Britain to become competitive again. Again, if interest rates rising were meant to be this good thing that you talked about, then why aren't we seeing good economic outcomes? We're not. We're seeing families, and again, calculating the cost, mostly with the mortgage crisis potentially on the way. And who's at fault? Well, it's it's Sunak and the Tories. It's not just Sunak's economic model that is in tatters. NHS waiting lists are going up, and for now, the small boats crisis is unresolved. And with another 10,000 arrivals this year, after 13 years of Tory government, how on earth is it possible that children are being encouraged to self ID as animals in schools? Again, that was a complete fake story. Um, I probably need to issue a correction at some point because I even maybe fed into that at some point wrongly. So I'll do something about it later, but not now. But that is a completely fake story that has been pursued by the right as a culture war thing. But yeah, it's 13 years of Tory failure. It's 13 years of Tory failure. So, rocked by events, the Tories appear to be more passengers on the ship of the state. They've lost control of the narrative and appear unable to communicate any kind of message, to even rebut any of Labour's attacks or land any sort of policy. Exactly what I've been saying. They're a complete zombie government. They can't even do anything to try and solve those problems. It is unsurprising, therefore, that the last 5 opinion polls this week predict that the Tories, at least around 28% of the vote, will do worse than John Major in 1997 or Jeremy Corbyn in 2019, and that Keir Starmer, around 46%, will do better than Margaret Thatcher, Tony Blair, or even Johnson ever managed. And that will be a good thing because we need brand new economic thinking in here to try and solve this. And getting the Tories completely out of government is a big start, primarily because there is a lot of stuff the Tories could be doing, but because they are so ideologically opposed, and because they are free market fundamentalists who firmly believe we cannot interfere with the economy, we should just let the economy, run free, even if it's in danger. We shouldn't step in to try and help solve it because we are completely opposed to that type of notion. That's why we are partly in the trouble where we are in. It is a calamity. The underlying options and opinions and values haven't shifted much, but voting intentions have. The Tory brand is a toxic once more, not because it is sufficiently modern, but because of the party has failed to deliver a conservative dream that it promised in 2016 and 19. Millions of voters with non-left wing opinions, for example, on immigration, welfare, or Brexit, tax, or even the culture wars, are lending their votes to parties which broadly disagree out of disgust with the discredited Tory party. Or maybe it might be that they like what these other parties are having to offer compared to what the Tories are offering, which is nothing at the moment. There you go. So such voters would be undoubtedly prefer to back a new populist party that is more closely to aligned with their own preferences, one that will emerge that one that they've even found credible. For now, Richard Trice's Reform Party seems to be flatlining. Will that change, or will a new party be launched by a political entrepreneur who has spotted a gap in the market? Will Nigel Farage return? If so, how low will the Tories slump? We've quit the EU, but risk becoming more European politically. Again, they can't even get out of it. But there you go. We've risked becoming even more European politically thanks to the Tory idiocy. In Germany, France, Italy, and across Europe, many of the mainstream centre-right parties have collapsed and have been largely replaced by more radical alternatives. I do hope and pray that any successful British political party would be firmly opposed to extremism. History, even recent history, says otherwise. The electorate is desperate for robust change, but this is unfortunately very little appetite for a European style nastiness. Brexit should have jolted the Tories out of their stupor. It didn't. It didn't at all. Instead, this has given the lunatics of the party even more opportunity to shine, and as part of the reason put us while we are in this position we are in today. They need to listen to voters more and absorb and channel the populist impulse into the mainstream to a pro-growth conservative party dedicated to improving the public's quality of life. It wasn't to be. Having debased the sterling, over-promised and under-delivered, Sunak's Tories face electoral annihilation and have only themselves to blame. Well, at least I'm glad he admits that at the end. At least I am glad that he does admit that. But it just goes to show you, I think, the level of panic. The idea that this would be a story in the Telegraph predicting that not only are the Tories going to get wiped out at the next general election, but it's very likely that, there'll be a new populist right party because, of course, the Tories didn't take advantage of it. They didn't take advantage of Brexit. And yet you've got, of course, as I said, very unfortunately, Liz Truss going around doing all these public speaking engagements is for a reason. It is to try and drum up support for potentially when she goes for another crack at the whip. If she survives the next general election, she will go again. She will have another try. And heaven help us if she actually ever gets back into power, because you saw the disaster that was her premiership. The idea that you could be potentially maybe looking at maybe two parliaments time, or maybe one parliament's time, maybe a resurrection if they decide to go in that populist mindset, is very worrying, because yeah, it will be bad. It will be very, very bad. And remember, as we just saw recently when she was having a go at Joe Biden, saying that the Inflation Reduction Act is a massive economic disaster waiting to happen. Well, it's not. It's been a massive economic boom for America. They are building right now the factories and industries of the future. What's the UK doing? It's doing nothing. The EU's even doing it. It's passing its own version of the Inflation Reduction Act. And the money, again, all the money from that will start pouring out next year. And where are we? What's our government doing? It's doing nothing. Why? Because it cannot move. It is a zombie parliament. It daren't do anything because Rishi Sunak knows that if he even dared to put forward an idea, it would be, they would start fighting, they would start infighting, and of course, that's what we're seeing. Unfortunately, I really do fear Liz Truss will come back. Now, that will be incredibly good, because I think, to be honest, any platform she ever stands on as a political figure, you just go, this woman crashed the economy, almost destroyed all your pensions. Do you really want this woman in charge again? Not gonna lie, that's an easy general election to fight. Because she's going to be coming back with the same economic mumbo jumbo, and you just remind people of that it's not going to win. But as we've always said, I think after this next election, the Tory party is going to go into a massive civil war, starting to fight the direction that it wants to go, and it's not going to be able to make a decision for quite some time. But while it's doing that, that is a massive opportunity for progressive parties to really make some positive change in the country. And you want to talk about opportunities? That's where the opportunity comes for us, to push for those progressive policies, to push through things like House of Lords reform, Westminster voting reform as well, for PR, and get that through. There's a ton of stuff, and I think the Labour plan for the UK energy company that is going to be sort of government owned, I think it's going to be a massive key political figurehead of Starmer's government. I really do. Like I say, I see it shaping up very, very nicely. And they've even got my favorite in there, which is the decarbonisation of the British steel industry, which will be very, very good. So As always, thank you very much for watching, of course. Please remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. We've been running another long one today, but never mind. Thank you very much for watching. And of course, as always, thank you very much. And yeah, thank you very much for all people who support the channel. Like I say, links down below, Patreon page, one of the nation link called Buy Me Coffee, the YouTube Pony Club, the YouTube thank you button. Even if you do, just click on the like and share button. Thank you very much for watching. And of course, we'll see you all next time.